Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to Samsung Internet Office Hours. This is intended as a space where we can chat. It's meant to be an informal kind of session where we talk about a topic and we take questions and hopefully give you answers about those questions. Anything about web development, web technologies. This is mostly going to focus on WebXR on this call. And we're going to be talking today with Ada Cannon, who's a member of the team here at Samsung Internet Developer Relations, and is also the co-chair of the the Immersive Web community group and working group in W3C. So before we get started, first of all, I would like to note that we're running under a code of conduct. I posted the URL for the code of conduct into the chat. So we just want to make sure that everybody feels welcome here and that nobody is harassed or anything like that. So we'll be pretty active about enforcing that. If you have an issue, feel free to raise it through the chat or to me directly. You can DM Samsung Internet on Twitter to raise issues. And we will take care of it, or you can raise it on the chat or talk directly to us if you want to. So that's with that. So yeah, I will. Without further ado, I'm going to ask Ada to introduce herself, and I'll stop sharing my screen.
Cool, thanks, Dan. So yeah, as Dan said, I'm as well as being a developer advocate for Samsung Internet, I'm co-chair of the Immersive Web Working Group and Community Group in the W3C. These two groups work together to produce the WebXR device API spec and the related modules which add additional features like AR. So yeah, that's kind of what I do in my day to day.
Great. So how's WebVR going, or how's WebXR going?
It's actually going really well. So over the past few months, some like huge changes have landed. So we landed we reached the milestone which we called VR complete, which was the point at which the WebXR device API is ready to fully replace the WebVR API, which has been implemented in browsers as a draft implementation for a number of years now. But going forward, like the stable, standards compliant way to do VR in the web will be through WebXR.
Right.
So that's really huge. It's landing in browsers. It's pretty good support. We support it in Samsung Internet for virtual reality. The AR modules and hit testing modules, which also goes with AR, I've started to land in some browsers too. So this is very cool and very exciting. And right now the both groups are working really actively to bring these these specs to the point where they can be implemented widely. And yeah, it's all coming along really nicely.
So I should also take the opportunity to introduce Laura, who's also on the call from the Dev Advocacy Group. Laura's online, I think, somewhere. Hi, Laura.
Yes, I'm here. Hi, everybody. Anybody needs anything or want to reach out, just ping.
Yeah. And So just to get an idea for kind of like, before we kind of like delve further, how many people have played around with immersive web technologies? Maybe you can like raise your hand. You can raise your hand on the lower left-hand corner if you've done any work so far on immersive web, or if you've what have you what have you been using it kind of in? For the people who raise their hand, just two seconds, maybe kind of like your experiences. Source Scoot.
Yeah, hi. I've not used WebXR really for business or stuff. I am really, since the beginning, I'm really excited about VR. I've been working with VR, through many years, but mostly work as a web developer, and the combination of the two really enlightened me a few years ago. And yeah, I'm really excited about the way it is moving right now.
Cool.
And I just mostly work on web VR stuff, web AR stuff outside my working hours, building games and fun stuff.
Cool. How about you, RVDIDLEUN?
That's RVD Loan. Loan being my last name.
Okay.
For me, it's actually fairly the same as Sorkut. Most of it just doing in my spare time because I really like WebXR. Most noteworthy is just a small app that I'm working on Office, which is essentially just like virtual desktop, but then built in with WebXR. And at the end of last year, I also started working for Verbela, which are working on Frame, which is essentially just like Mozilla Hubs, which allows people to come together, talk with each other. For that, I'm mostly focused on the WebRTC part again, which allows people to share their screens or their webcam and stuff like that.
Cool. Okay. Thanks. That's good. So also, just for a little bit of background info on us, the people attending this call might already know what Samsung Internet is, but we are a browser, and we're a browser on Android. We're obviously Samsung's browser. We're Chromium based, and we are also doing a lot of work in standards in our team, which is the developer advocacy group. So hence Ada's work in the immersive web working group. I also co-chair something called the technical architecture group in W3C. So we try to do a lot of kind of outreach alongside of the developer outreach that we're doing. We're also doing a lot of work in industry groups, standards groups, as well as we try and do open source contributions and that kind of thing, alongside of the open source work that the main engineering group is also engaged in, contributing back into Chromium as well, of course. So, okay, with all of that kind of in mind, Ada, do you want to show us something, or do you want to, how do you want to start off? Well, you disappeared. Okay.
Wrong button.
Okay.
Sure. How about I talk a little about what I was working on recently and some of the interesting things that went into it.
Sounds good.
So yeah, recently I started working on a new demo, and I was kind of just getting the scene set up really to work with WebXR, just so I can write about what goes into setting up a scene with WebXR. If I share my screen, so it's totally empty scene right now, nothing in it. And the thing I wanted to, what I wrote about, what I thought was interesting, was making like the locomotion stuff, and that's kind of what I've been studying recently. But yeah. So
So
kind of the Dan?
tell us about Locomotion, and remember to unmute your video too.
Okay, well, I can stop sharing my screen now. So yeah, Locomotion in VR is essentially the ability to move around a virtual scene. If you have like a decent headset which does 6 degrees of freedom tracking, like this one, you can walk around a scene, which is pretty handy. But if you're like me and your office is the size of this tiny room, you probably can't actually walk around a full VR scene, which may be kilometers in size. So that's when you kind of need stuff like VR Locomotion to be able
no te voy a dejar ir, ¿eh?
Whoops. Hold on. There we go.
yes. So that's why you need something like VR Locomotion to so essentially you tell the point in the virtual scene where you are instead, and you update the scene with that, and essentially you move the whole scene backwards to be where you are. So even though it gives you the appearance of moving, like if you look at what the code's doing, it's actually moving the world around you to place it in front of you.
Right. So when you were developing this, you were mentioning to me about making a real effort to make sure that people don't that people aren't basically made sick through this activity, through this action. And it really brought back to me the fact that this has never really been a risk in the web before, right? I mean, when we talk about risks in the web, we talk about things like privacy risks or security risks or performance risks or all other kinds of risks, but we've never really had the kind of risk to worry about where we might actually make the user physically ill. So that is a real challenge. And what did you have to do to kind of combat that?
Yeah, that is probably your number one goal when making something in VR is don't make the user throw up. Like that's just number one. Like number one, don't make the user throw up. Number two, make a good experience. Number three, probably make money or something. And yeah, it's really easy to do because if you have bad performance, the view will kind of lag behind a user and make them feel ill. If you move the camera without giving them like a head motion, without them moving their head like accordingly, yeah, they'll feel ill because it'll feel the world is moving around them. The same way you feel ill when you're like on a boat and the world is moving but your head isn't. Like it's a similar kind of feeling to seasickness.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's the kind of thing where if you want to move around in a VR scene, there's like a few options you can do. So the most commonly used way to do locomotion is to teleport the user, like without showing any kind of animation. So you fade to black, you move the camera, you fade back to the scene, which has the advantage of also being really easy to implement. So that's pretty handy. The way I'm doing it here in the demo, which I can show again, if I share my screen. So if you can see this, if I if I do another thing, then that was a bad example because my computer is not liking doing a video call and doing XR at the same time. So you probably couldn't really see it. But what I'm doing, I fade the view in so that you see the view through a small window. I then animate the motion of the camera so that if you look through the window, you can see it moving, but the environment around you, which is a very simple scene with a very simple like grid environment on the floor, stays still, like it doesn't move. Like if you move your head, you'll see it move, but if you but it doesn't slide anywhere. So this gives the user a stable environment in their peripheral vision, making it a lot more comfortable. I saw this kind of motion done in the Google Earth VR app. It's a really nice technique for giving like letting someone see how they're moving and how far without without actually making them ill. Oh yeah, and the other interesting thing it does as well, in that it's not very interesting, the way the camera motion happens, it's a very artificial. It goes from 0 speed up to like the camera motion speed and then back to 0. It doesn't ease in or ease out, because that kind of thing will also make the user feel pretty nauseous if you do it to the camera. So yeah, that's some of the thinking behind that.
What kind of feedback have you had so far?
So far, not a lot. Not a lot of people have been using this yet. I mean, there's not a lot of stuff in the scene to actually do. All you can do is teleport. So it's not that interesting. So I'm looking forward to finishing this particular demo, which is just going to be you're placing flowers and trees in this empty virtual world to try and make a nice environment. So I'm looking forward to seeing how people react to having it. But one of the things which I will implement when people are using it is that there will be toggles for how do you want to do locomotion? Do you want to do the fade to black, or do you want to have it the way I've got it at the moment?
So how have things been going or what, I guess, kind of segueing into talking about WebXR as a standard, what kind of features of the WebXR standard are you most kind of like highlighting through Locomotion demo at this point?
This Locomotion demo is literally just to show off the very core WebXR device API.
Right.
There are lots of modules for doing other things. So
but you're also showing showing controllers, for instance. Is that using the 3D controller models?
So yes, actually that's interesting. I will talk about that. So
sorry, yeah.
It uses the core WebXR device API for getting the controller position and doing the events for when the user pulls the trigger or when they pull the grip. It then shows the guideline for doing the teleportation.
Right.
Then I also do some work with the analog stick on the controller. So in WebXR, the buttons and the analog stick aren't exposed through the WebXR device API itself. The WebXR device API actually has a gamepad object that identical to what you'd get from the gamepad API, except it's attached to the WebXR input device is attached to the WebXR input device. So I created a thing which would poll the axes and buttons of the gamepad and turn the gamepad device. It would turn the gamepad API, which is polling based, into an event driven thing. I can share the source code for that later. So if you do a lot of work with gamepads in the web, or you want to start dealing with controllers with lots of buttons and axes and stuff, then like it's a kind of thing that's very, very handy and makes dealing with them a lot easier. But the thing which you mentioned, Dan, which is something which I am using, so it isn't a web standard, but there is a JavaScript library maintained by the Immersive Web Working Group, which is the point of this library is to take a look at the ID string of the controller, or the ID strings, because each controller has multiple IDs. So a controller will say something like, I'm an Oculus Quest controller, which is like this other controller, but failing that, it's a generic controller which has a thumbstick and a trigger and a squeeze button. So you, as an author of some software, can look at this and be like, I don't have this model, I don't have this model, but I do have the generic model for this particular hardware. So this allows you to target specific pieces of hardware while still being able to support generic devices and future devices with the same code. So this is like really powerful and was a feature missing from WebVR. Because if you made something based on WebVR, when new hardware came out, if you didn't explicitly try and support it, you probably wouldn't be able to use the controllers. So this was one of the really important new features in the WebXR device API. So anyway, back to this library I was talking about. So this JavaScript library is, it has a huge, it contains a huge library of JSON files, which describe how different controllers and their identities, like their profile string, match their buttons and axes to the inputs from the gamepad API. As well as that, it provides a 3D model of the controller, which is fully rigged and ready to animate. And it also includes information on how the different values from the gamepad API match up to animating the 3D model. And then finally, it does part of the animation for you. So there's a script built into Three.js, which uses this library to provide the controllers. So what if I share my screen again? Share your screen. So, and I bring this close to the camera. So yeah, you can see this is a this is showing the model for the Oculus Quest controller. Whoops, wrong one. Oh, it's actually currently inside the camera. There we go. So yeah, it's showing the model for the Oculus Quest controller. Because that's what I'm emulating here using the WebXR API browser extension, which if you want to do development with WebXR, I really recommend getting. And I'm guessing we'll put a link to that somewhere later. If I change controller to say HTC Vive controller, then it automatically loads the correct model for that as well, which is extremely cool and very powerful. So as long as you, as a developer, use an up-to-date version of this library, or you just pull in the library dynamically, you will automatically have the correct controller animated the correct way in your scene, and and if you're using like squeeze events and select events from the WebXR device API, like those should behave correctly no matter what controller you're using, because those come through the API itself. And if we're using the gamepad API, you might have to do a bit more work just to make sure that the inputs from the controller match up to what you're expecting. But yeah, it's super cool. So yeah, so there's some of the features which are like highlighted through this particular demo. Many of the other features we work on in the Immersive Web Working Group are to do with augmented reality. So like VR is kind of like a subset of AR in terms of features, and that's kind of how it's treated in the Immersive Web Working Group, where VR is like the core and AR builds on top of it. So the AR module just adds like the ability to pass through camera. The actually, I'll stop sharing my screen because you don't need that anymore. Yeah, so the like the AR module just adds pass-through camera. Then we have things like hit testing, which let you cast a ray into the real world, so you can start placing objects in the real world. We have stuff like DOM overlays, which so currently right now WebXR is purely a WebGL based API. So if you want to show some content on the screen, it needs to be rendered in WebGL before it can reach the headset or be displayed on the AR device. So if you want to do something like you want to show some DOM content, or you want to use CSS to build an interactive form, you're going to have to do. Previously, you would have had to do some dirty hacks to render it to a bitmap and send it to be rendered with WebGL. So the purpose of DOM overlay is to let you place use DOM objects in augmented reality and virtual reality. So it's still being worked on, but like early prototypes of it have started to land in browsers. And it's a feature a lot of people have wanted for like a long time. Because a lot of the people working with WebXR haven't just come from like the XR, like the VR AR industry. They've come from like the web developers as well. And you don't want to throw away like half your skill set when working with the web, because like the web has been doing 2D interfaces for like 30 years now. And it's got pretty good at it, and we want to keep using like those abilities. And there is like many other APIs as well, which are being worked on in both the working group and the community group. I won't go into all of them because there's quite a lot. We just got rechartered, and if you look at our charter, like we've put our fingers in a lot of pies, and we have a lot of things we say we're going to work on for the future. So there's still lots of work to come, and so it's an exciting time to get involved in the standards effort.
Right, and I guess the one thing, I can take a look. There's actually a link to the proposed charter here. I mean, this is where I get excited, because we're at the bleeding edge of using technology that we've actually been involved in developing, and which has just been developed in standards and is now kind of like being rolled out to devices and to developers for the first time. And so it's exciting to see what kinds of things you can do with it, and also it's a kind of good example of modern standards development in action. People are used to thinking about standards as being rather monolithic, and they're all developed by people that sit around in smoky rooms and drink cognac. And 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 this is really a good example. Immersive web, the WebXR stuff is really, in my mind, a very good example of something that got incubated in a community group effort with people coming from across the industry, and then kind of went through the more formalized standardization process within W3C, and now we have things in the rechartering process of that group that have come over from the community group again, and now are being brought through more formal standardization in W3C. So it's a kind of a good example of that as well.
Yeah, that's definitely the way the two groups work together. It's kind of odd being chair of both of them, because then I see both sides of the coin. So I'd say it's odd. Like currently, the chairs of the working group are also the chairs of the community group. So that's the way it's been working for a few weeks now.
It's to people who are not familiar with the standards, it can all sound really confusing. But I mean, basically the difference is there that the community group is open to everybody, and it's a more informal atmosphere. New ideas can be incubated. The working group has a set charter of deliverables and the working group is it's open to other parties, but it's not as easy to work within the working group if you're not a W3C member. You have to become an invited expert, which is kind of a process. So there are good reasons why you have that kind of dichotomy. One of them, but the important part of the kind of more formalized process is that whatever comes out of the other end of a W3C working group comes with the royalty-free W3C license. So anybody knows that they can implement it without having to worry about paying royalties to any of the companies that participated. And when you have a lot of companies participating, as we do with WebXR, that means a hell of a lot, actually. I mean, besides Samsung, there's Apple, there's Microsoft, there's who else? Oculus,
Google,
Mozilla, exactly, right. So, so it's a very that's kind of part of the point of standardization. But that's kind of my standardization soapbox. Sorry, I'll get down off of it now. Any questions so far from people in the in the chat?
I've been hearing the chat going, so I'm assuming there's some questions in there.
Yeah. I don't remember how to pronounce your name, but RVD. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, actually, I did have a question. Can I ask it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's to Ada, but maybe, but also to the rest of the channel. Actually, for the past year or so, I've mostly been working with A-Frame to create WebXR scenes. Mostly because in general, I tend to be a bit of a high-level developer. I don't really want to get too much into the nitty-gritty, but I am sort of curious to work more with Three.js. But personally, I just never get into it because with A-Frame, I can very quickly and easily set something up. Is there any particular, what would be a good reason for me to actually, what does Three.js provide over A-Frame, basically, sort of what I'm trying to ask here?
If you're looking to get persuaded to use Three.js over A-Frame, you're probably asking the wrong person. I myself will 95% of the time, if I'm starting a new VR project, will just pick up A-Frame just because I can get started really quick. And the nice thing about it is because it's built on top of Three.js, you can, if you're used to the Three.js JavaScript API, then you can build your own A-frame components based around your Three.js code and integrate them in and then share them. So you get the best of both worlds. You get the really nice ability to do high-level coding with A-frame, but should you need to, the Three.js APIs are right there for you to use and do stuff. So I usually end up making a fair few custom components each time I make something new, just because it never has quite what I need. But that's fine, because I can also pull in components I've made from previous projects. So I end up building, having these little bits where I can just pull in old code and remix it together really nicely. Like, the main reason you'd probably want to do something with Three.js directly, if you're is if you'd rather just be a straight up JavaScript developer and don't want to go anywhere near HTML, then Three.js is probably the way forward for you. Also, if you want to use like the very bleeding edge latest version of Three.js with your code, then you'd probably want to use Three.js directly rather than waiting for it to for the next build of A-frame. So yeah, I like A-frame. It's fun and it gets people building XR stuff. So I can't fault it. I like the aesthetic they go for as well. So it's good.
Yeah, and the declarative aspect of A-frame is just, it's so webby. Just the idea of, here's a sphere, it's blue, boom. That's, yeah. So I have to, yeah, I like that aspect to it as well. Other questions from other people?
There was a question from Nicholas. I'm just looking back through the thing. So if he wants to read it, or you can read it, or I can read it, I don't mind.
Yeah, you go ahead and read it.
All right. So Nicholas asked, what's the minimum amount of equipment required to try a VR demo? So depends on what level the developer's been willing to support. For demos which don't require any controllers, probably just like a smartphone and a cardboard headset will be enough. Like, then you can open it up. The browsers like Samsung Internet and Chrome, when using the WebXR device API, will use a cardboard viewer to display it, like out the box. No additional libraries. The browser is built into the browser, which is very cool. So you can just open up a WebXR scene, push the Enter VR button, and put it in a cardboard. And if you want to get started working on XR and haven't got a lot of money, that's a good way to start. Then I'd say like the next level up after cardboard is probably something like this, which is the Oculus Quest. It's a really nice headset. It's quite expensive at $400, but it's probably like the next level up. It's incredibly popular. It's been like the first headset which I've seen that's really taken off with consumers, and it's a really great device and is my daily driver as a headset. And then the level above that, you have the tethered headsets. So these are high quality headsets that are designed to connect either via a very long cable or wirelessly to a big old gaming computer. And these are where you get the really high-end VR experiences. And all of these three levels, for all the way from high-end gaming compute hardware to a Google Cardboard, all of these can be supported with a WebXR device API. So if you make something that'll work on the bottom end, you can guarantee it'll work on the top end. And if you really want to do any extra work, you can start doing detection for when you're really not pushing the system all that much, and then you can start bringing in like more complex geometries or more complex shaders.
So that is one of the most exciting things to me about WebXR, and it is the because it's web, it is not required to have fancy hardware in order to be a user, in order to engage people using this technology, right, to build something for them. So one of the examples of that I like to talk about is the Doctor Who game that we helped. We provided some support to the company Good Boy Digital to produce for BBC, which was a couple of years ago now, and it was built on top of the old WebVR API. But the exciting thing about that, the reason that, and I'm going to paste a link to the case study into the chat here, but the exciting thing about that was that BBC wanted to use that technology because they have a public service mandate. They wanted to get that application, they wanted to get that game out to as many people as possible, kids in their living rooms with, second generation phones, with maybe they had a cardboard, maybe they just wanted to use it in kind of magic window mode. And it's if you were able to get a higher end headset like a Gear VR headset, then you could play it in that mode as well with an enhanced experience. But it was also available to people with lower end devices, and that really got me excited about this whole space. And to me, that's one of the differentiators between WebXR and kind of the more vertical product specific XR environments. I don't know if you agree, Ada.
I do. And to further that, there's also one more benefit that's really similar. As well as targeting devices which are of like a wide range of devices from low end to high end, you can also target devices which haven't been released yet. Like it's designed to let you build stuff which is future proof. So like if you go to the Space Jam website that was built in 1995, you can open it in like a VR headset or on a phone, like on devices, which at the time was just total like sci-fi magic.
How did I know it was going to come down to Space Jam?
I love that website.
I don't know. Did you hear they're making a Space Jam 2?
Of course I heard.
Yeah, and so now the question is, who is going to get to build this website for Space Jam 2, right? I mean, that is like probably the most prestigious web development activity that you could imagine for some reason.
But like that website where it's built to last like tens of years, like it still works now just as well as it worked back then. And so you can hopefully will have people building WebXR applications today that will still work for as long as the web is still around. And I think that's incredibly valuable.
So we had another question from Nicholas about where is the WebGL restriction coming from? I think coming back to some comments that you were making before. Did you want to address that, or?
Yeah. So you have to use WebGL because so VR hardware has extremely high frame rates, and so the loop between going from what's on the creating what you want to be rendered and sending it to the headset is extremely tight. You want, because you have to have very, very low latency, and you want to keep it want to keep frame rates as high as possible. And so essentially, it goes straight from the graphics card to the display without anything in between. Well, the stuff that's on your rendered through your browser has like a very different life cycle, and it is possible to like, it would have been possible from the start to build something that worked with HTML and CSS out the gate, but it's such a monumental feat to do that actually displaying HTML and CSS on a VR headset through WebXR is something we're only doing today, even though like it's been a feature people have been wanting since the very early days of WebVR. So so it was kind of thing where if we didn't limit it to just WebGL, it would have just been too big a problem to solve straight out the gate. So it kind of, by narrowing the scope, allowed us to ship something. And now we're working out the problems we need to solve in order to show HTML and CSS content, which even today, these problems are numerous and really difficult, and are still being worked on these days. So it's one of the things that seems like an easy thing. Like, why don't you just show what's on the HTML script, like on your web page, except make it like tied to the graphics API? But it's just it's a far bigger problem than I'd ever imagined when I first started getting into the standards work.
Okay. Any other questions or comments or other questions about WebXR, questions about Samsung Internet, or anything else that we can?
There's a question from Rabia, who wants to know, who wants to learn about VR as a beginner, but they're not from a coding background. And my advice there is, like, if you've done a bit of HTML before, or if you haven't even done that, probably A-Frame is the best place to start as a beginner. Like, it's got a very shallow learning curve, but it's got enough depth and complexity to it that even someone who's been doing 3D for a long time can still get a lot out of it. So, like, A-Frame is definitely my go-to suggestion there.
And I think I can just drop a link for A-Frame. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Laura. Yeah. Thanks. Any other questions, comments? Laura, anything come to mind?
That we can actually build a demo for Space Jam. I think so. Space Jam?
I think it should be. I think we must.
Definitely.
The web developer community needs to come together on this topic.
I don't think there's anything wrong with the original website. I think they should just rebrand it and ship it exactly as it is, same code.
That would be an artistic statement. Okay, well, I think we said we were going to go about an hour. It's been about an hour. Ada, any further comments that you wanted to leave people with?
No, just like thanks people for listening to my rambling answers, and please have a go at making something with the WebXR device API, whether you do it with Three.js, A-Frame, Babylon, or just raw WebGL. Like, give it a go, see how it is. Try out making something in VR, try out making something in AR, like, and keep an eye on like the specs and like, keep an eye on the news for it, because it's moving really fast. So that's going to be I think it's an exciting time to get involved.
Cool. So, and just to leave people with some links to further material. So once again, you know, the homepage or the developer hub for Samsung Internet is samsunginter.net. And you can see all our latest articles on here. You can also see a link to the same articles on Medium, because we're posting the articles on Medium as well. And you can find links to our social media platforms. Let me see if I can. Basically, if you follow us on Twitter at Samsung Internet, and you know, we're always tweeting there. You can also follow us on LinkedIn, where I'm trying to post a lot of content as well. And you can get access to here from here to our demos and to some further support information